Hello and welcome to the LLG podcast. You're listening to Deborah Evans, LLG's Chief Executive, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi everyone.
Now then, last week became really exciting at the LGA conference when Angela Rayner announced not one but 3 major changes for the sector, which LLG and others have long campaigned for. Now, the first is remote provision for local authorities. This was absolute music to our ears following 4 years of working with ADSO, campaigning heavily, undertaking a judicial review, and a shout out here to NALC, who twice pushed through an amendment in the House of Lords, only to see it subsequently overturned by the last government. But here we are at least, and we're currently examining the consultation hot off the press and have offered to work with the government and others to ensure strong ethical governance into the process to enable local choice and agile, robust decision making. And it goes without saying that we really want to hear from you on this. What would suit your council? So do get in touch when you've had time to look at the consultation. Now, we also learned that the toothless tiger of sanctions are also going to get some teeth in the form of suspensions being offered as a sanction. Now, we're waiting on the consultation for that, but this is at last a tool which holds the small percentage of poorly behaved councillors to immediate account while restoring faith in the democratic system. Now, lastly, the no-brainer of withholding councillors' home addresses will be made into law. Now, this is because the alarming rate of increase of abuse, intimidation and harassment that's been directed towards councillors over the last few years. Now, it's been truly staggering, and this simple change will go a long way to protect those who are willing to step up and represent their community. But it's not just councillors who are increasingly under attack. Lawyers upholding the rule of law have faced increasing hostility. Tell me about it, Dennis.
Well, yes, indeed, Deborah. The Attorney General has given a significant and welcome lecture on the rule of law. So let's take a closer look at this. The Attorney General, Lord Richard Hermer KC, gave the Bingham Lecture on the rule of law, entitled The Rule of Law in an Age of Populism, on the 15th of October. Now, the fact that Lord Hermer chose to give such a major lecture on this topic so early in his tenure is telling in itself. Hosted by the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law at Gray's Inn and introduced by Baroness Helena Kennedy KC, the lecture was a significant event, well attended by the judiciary from the Supreme Court down, and parliamentarians, the legal profession and the civil service. The Attorney General signalled a reset after a testing time for the rule of law. There is always a risk when talking about the rule of law, of course, because it sounds pious, perhaps, or anodyne, or both. But this lecture contained things which needed saying after years which saw disputes around the Internal Market Bill, the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Act, a government deliberately choosing to breach international law and ousting the role of the courts. Comment was made about judges being branded as enemies of the people, with no meaningful defence from the then Lord Chancellor. And that other comment, of course, about lefty woke lawyers and all of that. Now, although not exactly partly political in tone, this lecture was clearly intended as a rebuke and a corrective to those times. And there was also an explicit attack on the divisive and disruptive force of populism. Lord Hermer set out proposals for a new approach and some concrete reforms. And Hermer talked about the need to strengthen Parliament's role in upholding the rule of law and in particular in scrutinising legislation. And he also wants to promote a rule of law culture and build a consensus around how it provides the stable and predictable environment in which people can plan their lives, do business and get ahead, in which businesses can invest, the economy can grow, people can resolve disputes fairly and peacefully and express and enjoy their basic rights and freedoms. But Hermer acknowledged there is a lack of funding for the justice system which cannot be cured overnight, but which cannot be ignored either. The government also needs to wean itself off the convenience of secondary legislation. This will not be easy when the pressure is on to keep the legislative programme moving. And more generally, After a bumpy first few months, the Prime Minister is still to issue a ministerial code or take concrete measures to ensure the highest ethical standards in government. Will the new code restore a commitment to complying with international law consistent with Lord Hermer's speech? Now, Lord Hermer's lecture is a powerful place to start. It represents a very distinct change of tone and intent from the previous government. There is no doubt that he means it. We will soon be able to judge whether these are more than just good intentions. Deborah.
Thank you, Dennis. Well, for those that want to read it, his entire speech is available on the government website. I was particularly interested to read his view that, I quote, "Most pressingly, there is, in my view, a real need to consider the balance between primary and secondary legislation, which in recent years has weighed too heavily in favour of delegated powers." Now, certainly we saw a lot of decision making during COVID utilised in that way. Now then, in other news, commissioners have published their first report into Birmingham Council, stating that governance problems lie at the root of the council's difficulties. Now, the report made public last week also raised concerns that members and officers appear to think external bodies, I quote, "cannot understand the exceptional character of the council." The report states that the scope of the governance challenges range from the more technical, such as the roles and responsibilities of audit and scrutiny, through to more abstract. But are at least as important in this are the issues around organisational behaviours and culture. Now, these include poor officer-member relations, inappropriate personal and professional behaviours, a failure to sustain a consistent view of leadership and its demands and priorities, both between members and officers and between officers themselves, and a failure to follow through policies once agreed. Now, specifically on member behaviour, the report states that in the first 6 months, commissioners have witnessed concerning behaviours from members which go unchallenged, and they've received whistleblowing complaints about the way in which grievance, sickness and disciplinary processes are managed and the partiality that's being expressed in appointments. Now, as reports go, there are quite severe findings, and as the report highlights, there are no quick fixes to this, just steady, determined, focused improvement designed to bring every element of Birmingham City Council that will continue into the mainstream of good practice and value for money. Now, it's really important to recognise that culture and a positive culture is one of the most important factors in good governance. Now, Dennis, sticking with Council's performance, you've been taking a look at maladministration.
Yes, the Housing Ombudsman has found severe maladministration for how a housing association failed to deal with damp mould in a home for 2 years and which left the resident unable to sleep in her bedroom. The case was one of almost 100 highlighted in the Ombudsman's latest report entitled Learning from Severe Maladministration, and this focuses on landlords' timeliness. Here's more. The Housing Ombudsman has found severe maladministration for how a housing association failed to deal with damp and mould in a home for 2 years, which left a resident unable to sleep in her bedroom. The case was one of almost 100 highlighted in the Ombudsman's latest report entitled Learning from Severe Maladministration, focusing on landlords' timeliness. And in another case, the Ombudsman had ordered a payment of £9,000 and made a finding of severe maladministration against a major social landlord after it failed to deal with damp and mould for 4 years. This was still outstanding when the determination was made. Now, the report for the first time required the compilation of an annex due to the significant number of severe maladministration decisions that relate to damp and mould. The Ombudsman, Richard Blakeaway, said the issue of managing damp and mould cases was coming into sharp focus with the government's intention to introduce AWAB's law into both the social and private rented sectors. The report reveals that 50% of the Ombudsman's casework now covers issues regarding damp and mould cases. Richard Blakeaway, Housing Ombudsman, said, "It is clear that landlords are still struggling with timescales. This is despite policies often setting out a clear sequence of actions and existing obligations requiring reasonable resolution times. He said, throughout these cases, landlord inspections are revealed as limited or repeated because of poor records before action is taken, with living conditions deteriorating during these delays. Often, he said, there can be a disconnect between the survey recommendations and the schedule of works as these repairs are being delayed. Cases also include repairs being completed, but issues remaining for the resident, and cases being closed without follow-up inspections or communication with the resident. Together with the human impact, he said, these delays can result in greater costs for the landlord, both in terms of repairs and avoidable redress. Landlords need to re-evaluate approaches to compensation using these cases to embed a fair and reasonable approach within local complaints procedures, which is an expectation of the statutory complaints handling code. It is wholly unreasonable, he said, to offer just £150 to a resident who lost both their bedrooms to mould for more than a year, as happened in one case. And he added, moreover, addressing the root causes of inadequate inspections and delays means resources can go into services rather than redressing service failings. Blakeaway said, we encourage landlords to engage positively with the lessons these cases provide and opportunities through the Ombudsman's Centre for Learning. These are invaluable and will help landlords to provide an improved service for their residents. Deborah.
Thank you, Dennis. Now, as a regulator, an ombudsman clearly has an important role to play, and indeed we're no strangers to regulators in the public sector, but they do have to get it right and meet the objectives of safeguarding the system. So here I turn to the review into the operational effectiveness of the Care Quality Commission. Now, the review has found significant failings in the internal workings of the CQC, which have led to a substantial loss of credibility within the health and social care sectors, a deterioration in the ability of CQC to identify poor performance and support a drive to improve quality, and a direct impact on the capacity and capability of both the social care and healthcare sectors to deliver much needed improvements in care. So let's take a little look into some of the facts. Now, there were less than half the inspections carried out in 2023 than those carried out in 2019, resulting in poor operative performance. Now, poorly performing IT systems resulted in delays. Poor quality reports were received and were extremely delayed in being produced. There was a loss of credibility within the health and care sectors due to the loss of sector expertise and wider restructuring, resulting in lost opportunities for improvement. There was a lack of clarity regarding how ratings are calculated and concerning use of the outcome of previous inspections that often took place several years previously to calculate a current rating. And of interest also was that there should be a greater focus on how organisations are approaching and delivering improvement, rather than looking at input metrics, which could enable more significant improvements in the quality of care. Metrics, of course, are currently the focus of Oflog. So lots of lessons from the CQC there, who appointed a new CEO in June of this year to undertake that work. Now, Dennis, we love a case involving the Privy Council at LLG, and one of note has recently handed down judgment in respect of decision making.
Indeed, Deborah. And this is the question: when do public bodies have to give reasons for the decisions that they make? All local government lawyers will have been asked this question, but now a recent case of the Privy Council, as you say, has now shed some light upon this vexing question. Let's take a look at what they said. Here we discuss the important Privy Council case of Pan and the Minister of National Security for Trinidad and Tobago. In this important case, Lady Simler said in relation to the duty to provide reasons that whilst there is no general duty universally imposed on all decision makers to give reasons, the courts have recognised many circumstances in which procedural fairness requires that reasons should be given to a person adversely affected by a decision. and that is even in a statutory context in which no express duty to give reasons is actually imposed. Lady Simler said that the benefits of giving reasons are clear. They concentrate the mind and impose a discipline which may contribute to better, more transparent decision-making. And the trend of the law has been towards an increased recognition of the duty to give reasons. There's been a strong momentum in favour of greater openness and transparency in decision-making. The touchstone for what fairness requires in this context is often judged by the ability to make effective the right to challenge an adverse public law decision by judicial review. Even where reasons are given voluntarily, they should be reviewed by reference to the same standards as are applied to reasons given in accordance with an established duty to provide them. And Lady Simler added that there is no uniform standard or threshold which reasons must satisfy in every case. What is required inevitably depends on the context and the circumstances of the individual case. The nature of the decision itself will affect what is required by reasons in any case. The full case report is available in Bulletin 40. Deborah.
Well, thank you, Dennis. That's one to pay attention to. Now, don't forget, you can still sign up for the LLG Governance Conference on the 13th of December in London, which will be an excellent opportunity to discuss all things vitally important to your role as a local government lawyer and come together in a trusted space to feel supported and heard. And let's face it, there is so much to discuss at the moment. It's an ideal time to network with your peers. So on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on this, the items discussed today, and many, many more besides by going to bulletin number 40, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Thank you for listening and do have a good week.